And we can get started. So, welcome to Reclaiming Self-Worth, Returning Women to a Seat of Enough. This is a little taster of a 5-week series I teach in August called Unpacking Worthiness, which I created a year ago. We're coming up on the next iteration of it in just a few weeks. And that is a class series that's predominantly designed for other coaches and practitioners, but I have had people go through the program who really were there for themselves as well. So whatever inspired you to be in this little micro tasting of that content, thank you for joining us. And if you're listening to or watching the recording, I hope you get exactly what you came here for this afternoon. Let's start with a little breathing. Let's start with a little winding down. It's late in the day where I am. Some of you listening to this or watching live are not in my time zone. You might be on the East Coast or West Coast. So let's take a breath together. Just taking a moment to find our feet on the ground wherever you're seated. I'm at my desk where I've been most of today. And it's nice to just take a beat and take a breath. You can close your eyes or find something unmoving to focus on, or you can even focus on the word breathe in front of you. And just take a breath. This might be your fullest breath you've taken all day. It might be the first moment today you're taking a conscious breath. You might have a breathing practice, so maybe this is something that we do all the time. And just settle into the here and the now. Putting down anything mentally, emotionally, physically that doesn't need to be a part of your experience for the next almost an hour. And really allowing yourself to receive whatever it is intrigued you enough to be here today. And also give yourself a little recognition. We all have full, packed schedules, and appreciate yourself for showing up for you for the next 55 or so minutes. And then connecting once more with your breath. And as you're ready, coming back into the room, you may take a sip of water. And you might also take a moment and just look at everything in front of you on your desk. I'm not suggesting we take time here to clean up our space, but if there's anything that is going to distract you for the next hour, just put it aside, put it behind you, put it on the floor. How can you be more present? How can you be just a little bit more available to the content? All right, in today's free workshop, we're going to go over 3 specific things. And again, this is a taster, but even my taster classes and free workshops, I don't hold back. So this is real content out of that 5-week series. It's also complete content. So you may get everything you need here. It may give you that insight or guidance you're looking for at this moment. It may also be an introduction for something. So specifically, we're going to cover why self-worth is the pervasive problem it is today, especially among women. How does a patriarchal culture, and what is it? We're going to give it some definition, undermine our sense of enough. How does it show up? What are some of the ways, unconscious, unknowingly, this sort of groundswell has infiltrated our sense of enoughness? What could it mean to create a collective endowment of worthiness? I have to give a shout out to Tanya Denise Fields. I heard her say this once many, many years ago. I don't know her personally. It was, I think, in a podcast or a book. She said one of the things that drove her was imagining handing down through her lineage to her daughter and her daughter's daughter an endowment of worthiness. And I thought, what a cool way to imagine legacy, not just in the physical things that we pass down, but can we pass along a sense of enoughness? What can we do wherever you are, whatever age you are, whatever lot in life you hold, whatever role you play? How can we individually and collectively begin to imbue more of ourselves and the people we love with a sense of enoughness? And then at the very end, I will share a little bit about unpacking worthiness. If you're interested, also everything you need to know about it is on the website. A little bit about me for those who are new to me or have not taken a class from me before. I am Andrea, and I created a landing pad for my work a few years ago called Braver Coach, although I've been in the coaching space going on 10 years, coaching going on 13, and in business going on 10. And I founded this particular pocket of the work because I believe women are being called to create a braver world. And that may even be a prompt you want to play with. What does it mean to live bravely? But more specifically, what does it mean to build a braver world? And my goal at this moment is to equip women specifically with the skills we all need to rewrite those outdated, internal, old scripts keeping us from being who we came here to be. All that good internal stuff. And this class is a nice little introduction to that work for sure. Something I want to acknowledge and that I do my best to acknowledge in all of my classes is the lens by which I teach from. I acknowledge that my perspective on this topic and all the topics in my body of work are shaped by my identity, specifically as a queer, cisgendered white woman. So while I strive to incorporate diverse sources as much as possible, and I do seek external support around putting and compiling together classes, it's important to recognize these factors and influence because I can't unhook from them and I can't see from outside of them. So that lens is going to find its way into the content this evening. And let's just keep that in the back of our minds. We all have a model we walk around in the world in, and it's important to recognize that, especially when we're picking up topics such as this. All right, we can do this in the chat box. You can also just jot down on your paper for those who are just watching the recording. What do you hope to learn or remember in this workshop? What is something you hope to learn or remember? And you can jot that down on your paper. It may be a quick little thing. It may be a bit longer. I'll give you a moment here to answer that prompt for yourself. And if you want to share in the chat box, feel free to do so. Thanks, Jen. I always appreciate your participation. How to encourage worthiness in myself and others. Yeah. And how do we encourage something that maybe we don't have an entire viewpoint of, or we don't even know entirely where did it go and when do I feel it and how do I access it and how do I pass it along? And so that encouragement piece, and I would add for myself that access. How do I access that so that I can encourage it in myself and others? Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. If you're just joining us, we're just getting started with this prompt here, and you can share it in the chat box or just jot it on your paper as we go into the content. What do you hope to learn or remember with this content today? So if you have that in front of you, just put it aside or just hold it in the back of your mind. We'll do our best to meet that need. But for everybody live and on the recording, we come to this work for many different reasons. And every reason, as far as I'm concerned, is valid and is an invitation to something that we're not just curious about, we're probably picking up on in our larger communities. So that may also be what drew you to this content tonight. Let's do a little defining of the term. Specifically, we're going to define worthiness, and then we're going to define unworthiness. What is its counter? So worthiness, for the purposes of this class, this workshop, is recognizing and accepting oneself without conditions, embracing both strengths, imperfections, this and that and the other. It's acknowledging, accepting ourselves wholly and fully. Now, this is my definition. Feel free to add, adjust as you see fit, but I'll pause here if you want to write this down. Recognizing and accepting oneself without conditions. That's the big piece for me here, without conditions. And I would add, as often as we can remember and as best we can. This is not a perfection practice. We may get here once in a while. We may get here all the time and slip out once in a while, and everything in between. So this is a caveat that my own mentor gives me: as often as we can remember and as best we can. So what is its counter? Because its counterbalance is what I believe draws us to content like this. If we're going to reclaim something, where have we been instead? If we've not been living from that seat of enough, where have we been? It doesn't mean we felt unworthy necessarily, but as a flip side to the coin, let's define this. Feeling fundamentally flawed or inadequate, often due to internalized negative beliefs, past experiences, or external influences. And specifically in this workshop, we're going to look at how external influences and past experiences sort of combine themselves internally to become this unconscious pattern maker that we tend to repeat over and over and over. Not feeling good enough at some point becomes a habit that we get really good at. And we don't mean to, we don't necessarily want to, but it becomes this habituated way of being. And so one of my hopes for this content, whether you're just here tonight or you join us in the longer series, is to start bringing more awareness and recognition to when we're doing that. When are we in the script versus aware that there even is a script? And when I say script, what I mean is an internalized story, something we're telling ourselves about ourselves, true or untrue, but at the moment it plays out, we think it's the truth. And again, with all definitions, feel free to add, subtract, make them your own. Okay, in a word, what has been your experience with navigating self-worth? And you can put that in your journal. If you want to share it in the chat box, love to hear from each of you or even one of you. What has been your experience? But this is mostly important for you to have. In a word, what has been your experience when navigating your own self-worth? And I'll give you a moment. And I would trust intuitively what pops up pretty quickly. Awesome, thank you. The word fight comes to mind, roller coaster, fighting for it. Yeah, the word that immediately pops up for me is messy. It just feels messy, murky, evasive. Yeah, and I like the roller coaster. I can relate to that. It kind of feels up and down. And the fighting for it was such an interesting way to look at it, right? Because navigating self-worth is something we have to go out and demand or prove or get, either from ourselves or from another source. Okay, so hold on to that, because the rest of today's workshop is about how essentially did we get here. And if I had 100 people on the call, I would hear the same thing over and over. Something I have to fight for. It's a roller coaster. It feels uncertain. I feel doubt. Sometimes I have it, sometimes I don't. It feels murky. It feels elusive. It feels like it should be easier. I ascribe it to too much of those outside of me. I don't have enough of it. The list goes on and on. I've had enough conversations with women over the last 10 plus years to know there's something going on. There's something missing. Even though I wholeheartedly believe we're born worthy, we die worthy, and we don't lose any worth in our lifetime. So if we are endowed with it from the moment we take our first breath, why don't we feel its impact or influence on a regular basis? And this isn't every woman walking the planet. I don't want to make such a bold statement. It happens to be a lot of the women that cross my path, and probably because it's been a walk that I've been on myself. So how did we get here? Now, I'd say this from time to time. I'm going to put a little caveat on this little chunk of content here. I don't teach about self-worth from the belief that it is something we need to individually work on. It is absolutely something we are solely responsible for tending to, but we're going to look at where it comes from, not as something we individually created, but something that we are trying to navigate, something we're swimming in, And when you can see what you're swimming in, I think it helps us to have more appreciation for how do we get out of it? Well, first we have to acknowledge that we're in it. We have to acknowledge that we didn't create it, but we are impacted deeply by it. So here are the roots, and this is straight out of Unpacking Worthiness. In that series, we go over this in serious detail. So this is a snapshot, and I'm going to give a little bit of information about each one. You don't have to draw this on your paper, but if you want to write down anything that jumps out at you that in particular has affected or impacted you around your self-worth, feel free to do so. These are external systems that we can't unhook from. We can participate as little or as much as we want, but it isn't always that simple. So I'm going to start over here on the left, and we're going to go down to the base of the root and then back up to the right. So how did we get to this feeling of not enough? If we are born worthy, we die worthy. What is going on in the middle? And in particular, this is something I'm speaking to about women. So health and beauty standards, predominantly set for us by dominant culture, has a viewpoint that there is a desired way to look, to feel, to eat, to move. And if we don't meet those standards, what do? We turn it in on ourselves. We somehow feel that we're the problem. We can't just get with the program. And these standards, I would like to put standards in quotations because they're not normalized in the sense that they're neutral. They're standards in that they have been set for us and we live in a system that upholds it. I don't even know the amount anymore that is spent on health and wellness on an annual basis, just in the US alone. It's probably in the billions or trillions. To control, to conform, to ensure we somehow get ourselves into that perfect right health and wellness statute so that we can feel good enough. I don't know about you all, but I have never participated in health and wellness from a place of trying to feel like enough and it actually work. It just becomes a snake eating its own tail. Okay, down here below that, patriarchal driven gender norms. That is a mouthful, and we're going to give definition to this in a moment. This is one we're going to spend more time on specifically today, and we do spend a lot of time on in the series. What does this even mean? Living in a patriarchal system, which we do, it dominates the biggest heads of our life: government, finance, education, infrastructure, access to social services, et cetera, are predominantly driven from a patriarchal normative standard. And these have gender norms regardless of your chosen gender expression. We have these gender norms that presuppose in the patriarchy, women are inferior, men are inferior. Now that's a really diluted outcome. So I want to be careful because it's much more complex than that. But we don't see women being represented in all branches of our life. We don't see women in powerful positions enough of the time. We don't see women in heads of government, heads of state, heads of education, heads of financial institutions, heads of companies. We don't see it, and that's part of the lack of representation. How are we going to feel good enough in a system or in a society that we begin that walk in this world being told we're not enough? And if we look at the data and we look at the research, women are asked to qualify themselves more, to justify their qualifications more, to explain their qualifications more, just for the same thing. Economic inequality, which is really gender-based, but also mostly affecting working mothers. So there's another caveat there. Intergenerational trauma, we pass it down. We know that we can pass trauma through the gene expression. We know that we can, and none of us can unhook from it. And we're not trying to do it. It's not a conscious choice. This is something that is embedded in our biology. We pass stories down. We pass trauma down. Sometimes I wonder how much of my own walk around self-worth is mine. How much was my mom's? How much was my grandmother's? Heck, how much was my father's? And there's no way to get to the absolute core root, but it's worth noting some of that which we're unpacking in our lifetime didn't start with us. And it may not end with us, but can we bring more awareness to it? Above that, lack of representation, which I just went over, scarcity thinking, the mythology that we don't have enough, we can't get enough, and we'll never keep enough. Scarcity thinking is not the same as scarcity. Scarcity is a real lived experience for millions of people on the planet when we quite literally do not have enough access to resources to support our well-being. Scarcity thinking, however, is a mythology that we can't be enough or not enough, we can't have enough, or if we have it, we can't keep it. And the very last one at the top right there, cultural and religious inferiority. In a nutshell, it's this belief that, especially in some, I want to be careful, in some organized religions, that women have an inferior role to play. And if we go back to the origin story, good old Eve, taking her innocent little bite, we have been plagued by this original sin for millennia. So this is one that I won't unpack this evening, but we do unpack it in greater detail in the longer series. Okay, this is a mouthful. This is everything. To me, these are the main players. These are the institutions and the systems that we interact with on a regular basis, whether we know it or not, whether we're invested in them or not, that can run in the background, eroding our sense of enough, our sense of worthiness. So my question to you all is to reflect on the root that has had the most influence on you. They've all influenced all of us. None of us can unpack or get out from underneath any of them. But reflecting on the root that has had the most influence on you to your awareness at this moment, how has it affected your perception of your own self-worth and your own worthiness as a woman? This is a big question. So I want you to write this down. We're going to spend a few minutes on it now, but you may come back to it after this workshop is over. So reflect on the root, and I'll go back to the screen. It has had the most influence on you as you're aware of. How has it affected your perception of your self-worth? How has it affected your sense of enough? And you might be able to pick out a little bit of something from everything, but is there one that you can intuitively go, yeah, that one is really underlying so much of this for me? So take a few minutes here. I'll take a pause. One more minute to explore that for yourself. Start to find a wrap-up point or a final thought. And again, here's the original question if you didn't get it all written down. Quickly, you can look side by side between whatever you reflected on, whatever came up for you just now, and that original prompt I asked you back here. In a word, what has been your experience navigating self-worth? And hopefully we can start to see, some of the words that came up for you all: roller coaster, fight for it. My word was murky, messy. Well, it's no wonder. It's no wonder it feels, and it's not to explain it all away, because we have a part to play too. We have participated in our own part of it. But again, we are very rarely the root cause. So how do we, and this is an open-ended question, I'm not going to answer this tonight, but how do we reclaim something that we're living within a system that continuously erodes? And how do we find self-trust and self-belief and safety within, even inside of systems and institutions that are not yet built to represent women as being wholeheartedly enough? But that's part of the collective endowment of worthiness, I think, is to start to embody those traits for ourselves, even inside of a system that says we're not supposed to, or we shouldn't be able to, or is going to make it really difficult to. So tonight we are going to spend some time on patriarchal conditioning. I don't often teach on this topic, even though I coach on it. It comes up in many of my coaching conversations. It's a topic that I get asked about. It's vulnerable to share on this topic. Talking about systemic afflictions as a privileged individual is something I'm hyper mindful of. And also, it affects everybody. It's affecting everybody. And one of the essential questions and prompts I hoped to explore with everyone this evening was, how does living within a patriarchal society undermine our sense of enough? So we're going to look at 3 specific ailments of this affliction. And I'm also going to give some definition, because this is a mouthful. This is a surface term for something that is so complex. So this is a long definition. I don't expect you to write this whole thing down. If you want to come back to the recording later and pause it, if this is helpful for you, do. But for the context of this class, I'm going to define it as the process by which individuals within a society are socialized and shaped to conform to the values, norms, beliefs, and behaviors that support and perpetuate the patriarchy. And this involves the internalization of societal expectations, biases, power dynamics that prioritize male dominance and authority while subordinating women and other marginalized folks. And we see this everywhere. It wasn't always this way, but for the last 2 or so thousand years, this has been our quote unquote standard system. And it's important to note here at the bottom that conditioning is not necessarily a deliberate or conscious process. It often occurs through subtle social cues and implicit bias and systemic structures that we don't have awareness of all the time, but we're in it constantly. We can't unhook from it. So this is the system we're in. And however your relationship to this system, whatever your relationship to this system, make no mistake, we're all in the system. So I want to go over just a couple of things here that are critical to the rest of this workshop. It's a process of socialization, and it begins pretty early. It's a system we're born into, so we can't unhook from it even from our first breath. And it is shaping us and conforming us, not just in this external thing that we're out in the world contending with. No, it's internal as well. We do this to ourselves. I'm reading a really powerful book right now called On Our Best Behavior. And it's a pretty critical look at how our current system of patriarchy is rooted in predominantly Western organized religion, and how it has undermined women's sense of enough from all angles. And not just this emotional, mental onslaught, but also it's in our systems, it's in our government, it's in our structures, it's in the data. And it is nothing I didn't know, but oh my gosh, is it affirming to things that I sometimes think, is it just me? How am I supposed to overcome this? And it's a reminder that there's a collective burden that we're all bearing the brunt of. And so when we talk about reclaiming a sense of enough, we have to remember the context in which we're trying to reclaim it. And I hope that content like this and workshops like this help us feel less crazy when we don't seem to be able to access it on a regular, ongoing basis. So I'm going to point out three really insidious components of living under patriarchal conditioning that I think are the most undermining to our sense of enough or our self-worth. And I pointed this out in the roots, but one of them is patriarchal driven gender norms. Now I'm a queer woman and I am married to a woman, and we fall into this trap. So it's nothing to do with sex or sexual orientation or sexual expression or even gender expression. It is imbued in our society of how we're supposed to show up in partnership, in our work, in parenting, you fill in the blank. Let's go over the bullet points here. Long-standing patriarchal norms assign specific roles and expectations to women, often emphasizing that their value primarily is as caregivers and service providers. And I happen to work as a service provider, as I'm sure many of you on the call do as well. So it can be confusing to me at times because I genuinely like to give care. I like to uphold care. I like to be generous with care. And I also wonder how much of that was really honed in on for me as a child, that was where my gifts lied, was to be a caretaker. And such norms are also seen and treated as inferior or lesser than. This isn't just some rhetoric. We don't pay people in service industries nearly as much as we do in other leadership positions. Look at our social workers, our nurses, our teachers, our nannies, our house cleaners. We don't uphold their role as better than or even greater than some of these other businesses we see out there in the world today. And these norms can create a sense of worthlessness when women are not seen as equal in other domains, such as education, career opportunities, financial decisions, and more. The next one that filters in is a reinforcement of biases. And I don't think we mean to do this. It's not conscious. This is unconscious, but it is implicit. So conditioning can expose us to stereotypes associated with social identity, such as race, gender, age, sexuality, ability, and socioeconomic status. And it's reinforced through things like media, predominantly media, social media, absolutely, but also media like news and film and music and communities that we live in as well. And this internalization can lead to a diminished sense of self-worth if we keep seeing people who look like us and who act like us and who operate like us as being treated as lesser than. It's nearly impossible to not absorb that messaging. And so we may, as individuals, believe that we are limited by these negative expectations and biases associated with our group. even if you're a cisgendered, white, heteronormative woman, you're still experiencing bias layered in by the sheer fact that you walk around in a woman's body. But then we begin to add in other intersectionalities like sexual identity, gender expression, the color of your skin, the amount of money you have in the bank, the amount of education you have access to, the list goes on, your ability, your physical ability to maneuver in the world. As a queer woman myself, I remember when I came out to my mom, my greatest fear was how to protect her feelings about me. And this is a teeny tiny little example. And even as of a couple of years ago, my niece, who's only 12, she's young and she has a lot of life ahead of her, but she was having some complex feelings about someone of the same sex. And she was terrified to tell her parents, not because of the parenting, because we still live in a system that tells young girls and young boys and young theys and young theirs that there's one orientation that's accepted and all others are different, undesirable, something we have to explain, justify, and fight for. And that is the truth. And that's just one identity. And so imagine, how do we access our sense of wholeness when we live inside of government systems and policies that continually tell us that as we are and who we are is not worth protecting or valuing or creating policies that protect and value. And the third one I want to go over today is lack of representation. This one's critical. Representation matters. That's a complete sentence. Representation matters. Women are often underrepresented in positions of power and leadership across all fields, including politics, business, academia, as well as media, entertainment. What do we do if we don't see people who look like us and act like us and come from places like we do in positions that have more power or opportunity? How do we get there? How do we feel like we have enough of what it takes to get there? And it is an absence of role models, but it's also an absence of representation, simply seeing out in the public view, culturally accepted people who look and act like us. And it will limit our opportunities because we'll internalize that. And also there are factors that diminish it in us. And I think that that undermines our confidence for things that we are overqualified for and overprepared for. And we're not boasting confidence. The data shows that women typically undervalue their sense of skill and undermine their qualities, even when they are well and above qualified for the things that they are interested in. And we tend to not take on things that we don't innately feel worthy of, even if we are above and beyond enough for that very thing that we want. And so representation, and it's changing, and I'm excited to see it change. But until it does in its entirety, being mindful that and being aware that we don't always get the benefit of seeing people like us doing big, brave, bold things, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be. Okay, that is a mouthful, all of that. And I know that I'm giving you all a lot of really big topics tonight in a pretty short amount of time. So this is a class you might want to revisit, you might want to rewatch, and you may even have questions around that you want to bring to me as well. And I'm going to leave a few minutes here at the end of our workshop for that very thing, if you want to dialogue some of this. So what is the antidote? What is one of the antidotes to not feeling like enough, to returning women to a seat of enough within a system that is not built for it ultimately? And that sometimes it feels risky to claim that inside of the system we live in. So for me, self-trust, that safety within, faith within myself, is the invitation to create an endowment of worthiness for myself and for others in my world, whether it's family, friends, my partner, my community, my clients. How do we expect ourselves and those around us to begin to clip the wings off of unworthiness if we don't start to enact more self-trust with ourselves and support others to do the same? And there's other ways that we can do this endowment, but self-trust is one that I point back to quite often. Maureen Murdoch, in her book, The Heroine's Journey, said every woman has to learn where her true source of validation is. As you've seen from today's content, we may not get absolute validation from sources outside of ourselves, other than, and hopefully we get it from our near and dear friends and family who we have entrusted that kind of affirmation with. But we are our true source of validation. We have to be. We may not get that mirror back. I may not get it in my lifetime. I'm so hopeful my niece will get it in her lifetime, but I don't know. So how do we begin to create this sense of true validation within ourselves? So what does self-trust mean to you? And jot this down on your paper, jot this down in your journal. You might just write down a few bullet points. I'll give you a minute here. What does self-trust mean to you? You can come back to that if you want to, of course, always adding as we go on or as this content integrates over the next couple of days. Giving this some definition for yourself. What does it mean to have trust in yourself? What does it mean to have faith in yourself? What does it mean to self-affirm or have self-validation? I think these are critical questions for women to be asking themselves. And again, as often as we can remember and as best we can, there's no ounce of perfection here. And this is something that I get asked time and time again from my clients that I can't answer, but my antidote is simple. How the heck are we supposed to counter or create a sense of enoughness or a sense of self-trust when we're living in such a massive, for lack of a better word, shitstorm that doesn't seem to want to let up on giving us a fair share of our value in the world? And my response is always that the only thing we can do is tend to the corner of the world that we embody. You tend to the space you're in, the roles you already play, the person you are, the resources you have, the community you're in relationship to, and the gifts that you bring. All of that, it has to be enough. We have to let that be enough. And self-trust for me is so small and unseen, and yet it could be the unlock for everything. If more women trusted themselves explicitly and implicitly, what might that look like? So a few practices for myself of self-trust: saying yes when I mean yes and saying no when I mean no. There is no greater way to undermine my sense of trust in myself than saying no when I mean yes and yes when I mean no. So very simple, but easy to overlook. Saying yes when I mean yes and saying no when I mean no. Pausing is a self-trust practice. Pausing my action list for the day and saying that's enough for today. Pausing the incessant chatter of anxiety in my mind of how am I going to get more, do more, be more, impact more. And go, just pause. I can't answer that at this moment. I'm going to pause. Sometimes pausing is walking away. Sometimes it's literally going for a walk, getting up from my desk, moving myself away from media or technology. How do we take little micro pauses? Rest. Rest might be for women one of the most anti-patriarchal acts we could enact on a daily basis is to be fully rested. We're not told that we're allowed to rest. We're told that we can rest after the needs of others have been fully met. And for so many of us, myself included, sometimes rest makes me deeply uncomfortable because I'm so used to constantly going, doing, being, trying, expressing, emailing, making money. And then I'll go to my partner and say, I'm so agitated. And she'll say, you need to go rest. And I look at her like, that is the hardest thing anyone has asked me to do all day. You want me to do nothing? I can't even fathom. And all the feelings come up and but am I doing enough if I do nothing? I think the answer is yes. Self-validation, being in community of people that I trust, being in community of women that I want to model trust for me. I don't only have women and those who identify as women in my community, but it's predominantly what makes up my community. Is that's important to me. Self-care, naps, that's another anti-patriarchal act, a nap. And what else, right? These are some of my practices, but what are some of your practices that help you practice self-trust? And letting that practice also be complete and enough as it is. We're not doing it to try and get anywhere. We're not doing it to try and prove anything. We're doing it as an act of honoring what is true for ourselves. So feel free to jot these down, but also add to the list. Add to your list. What are your self-trust practices? All right, that is all the content I have for you all. We have about 8 minutes left, so I do want to open the floor for questions. Before we do, I want to just go over a quick couple of details about unpacking worthiness for anyone who's interested, whether you're here live or you're watching the recording, and then I'll open the floor for Q&A. So Unpacking Worthiness is a 5-week series designed to help you and your clients, if you're in relationship to clients through your work as a coach or a consultant or a practitioner, around this topic of cultivating self-worth. Class begins August 1st. It is the first 5 weeks, or sorry, not the first 5 weeks. It is 5 weeks in August, and it is a 5-week month, so it's nice and contained in the month of August. There are 5 classes. They are 2 hours each and they are live. This is all on the website. If you go to bravercoach.com/school, you can find all the information there. We start on August 1 with unpacking the roots. That root slide that I threw up there for about 5 to 6 minutes, we spend an entire 2 hours really getting to a clear understanding of what is this? How do we work with it? Can we work with it? What's our role with it? And ultimately, how does this affect or impact us individually and the communities that we're in service to? The second class is on scarcity, perfectionism, and conditioning. I would say the 3 primary afflictions to worthiness. On the third class is a practice session, and I've made the practice session so easy that you don't have to be a practitioner or a coach. These are tools and practices that anyone can do. You can do with a client, or you can just do with yourself. And then our fourth class, embodying self-trust, we begin to turn the corner from what is the affliction to how do we actively encourage and create the antidote? What is the antidote to all of this? And then we wrap up our 5th week with our final practice session, specifically looking at the importance of self-compassion and self-acceptance. And again, those practice classes are super easy for anyone to pick up, but you may learn something you want to bring to a client, or you might take it just for your own self-awareness and self-development. The 5-week series includes access to all the sessions. They are on the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, 22nd, and the 29th of August from 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. I do encourage live attendance. I know that it is summer and getting to all 5 is a tall order. So my minimum request is that you come to the practice sessions, but I hope if you attend, you can come to all 5. We have weekly meditation at the top of the class. There's always opportunity for supportive spot coaching during the class, as well as live Q&A, so that you feel that you're getting real integration around the content. It is a small community. I won't put more than 10 women in the series. You'll have access to all the slides. There are workbooks, techniques, as well as lifetime access to the course. So once you buy it and once you go through it, you have ongoing access to the content. So if you want to go back and refresh yourself at any time, it is there for you. It is available on a sliding scale from 400 to 600. And again, it is limited to 10 women and registration is currently open. So you can go to bravercoach.com/school. You can read all about it. You can also reach out to me via email if you have any personal questions I didn't get to today. Okay, I want to open the floor. I'll turn on my video, say hello. Are there any questions from today's content? Feel free to put it in the chat box or pop on video if you want to. I'll just leave the floor open for those of you who are able to join us live.
Love to hear your take on if you make decisions that haven't worked out in the past, like how then do you trust yourself to make better decisions in the future?
Ooh, I love that question. I think it depends on the context in which the decision didn't work out and what were all the influences that affected that decision. I imagine it wasn't just you, right? We never make decisions. We don't really make decisions in a vacuum. Even if we're the only one making it, we're making it with anything internal that we've absorbed that's affecting our decision. So I would unpack the context first of all and take yourself through what in the context of that decision, where did it get wobbly? And in hindsight, what was the actual crux of it not working? And if I could make it that decision again, what would I do differently? And then we have to have the willingness to try. And I would say try in a situation that doesn't feel risky relative to you, because then we're more likely to follow through. Does that help, Jen? Yeah. Thanks for asking. I think it's a good question. I think a lot of women can relate to that. Right. And I think too, I won't speak for everybody, but for myself, I have a really low tolerance for public mistakes or for personal mistakes that I think are going to get out there publicly. Like my threshold for it is not very high. So, putting our tail between our legs and kind of hunkering off into the corner, that's my MO as well. And it takes some courage to kind of dust that off and go, okay, wait a minute, how much of that was warranted and how much of that is just a repeated old script that doesn't actually have merit in this situation? Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments or any shares anyone wants to offer before we wrap up? Alrighty, I will let you all go. Thank you so much for the few of you who are able to join us live. I'm always so grateful to have a little bit of interaction. It's more fun to teach a class when there's other people listening and tuning in. I will send the replay out tomorrow. You'll have 7 days to access it if you want to rewatch it or just have access to it. And this Unpacking Worthiness does start in just a few weeks. So I'll make sure in the email I send out to everybody that I include a registration link if you want to learn more about it. And when I send that email out, you can reply to that email if you have any questions about the course or even from the content today you want to ask privately. That's totally okay as well. All right, y'all, thank you so much. Have a lovely evening and be well, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye, everyone.